stars were closer here, vibrant and restless, painting the sky in colors that, to human eyes, seemed more alive than anything back on Earth. Alone on this foreign world, a young man named Lucas gazed up at them every evening, reminded that he was the only human for countless light years. He had been a willing traveler, a member of a human diplomatic team sent to exchange knowledge with the mysterious inhabitants of Xe'liar, a planet brimming with life both beautiful and strange. But something had gone wrong in transit. Lucas had been separated from his team and arrived in a different region, one barely settled by humans. The Xe'liarians were humanoid but strikingly different in ways Lucas could only describe as breathtaking. Their limbs were longer, more graceful, and their eyes shimmered in impossible colors that shifted with their moods. The people of this settlement, understanding his plight, welcomed him in a quiet, reserved way. At first, they were silent and distant, observing him with curious but cautious expressions. In their culture, beauty held significance beyond simple aesthetics. Beauty was revered, respected, and cultivated in all things. As he wandered, Lucas felt pulled to the heart of the settlement, a grand structure of crystalline stones and smooth, flowing architecture that seemed to hum with energy. The settlement's elder, a being of almost indescribable elegance with skin like polished marble and hair like a cascade of iridescent silver, met him there and offered him safe haven. They spoke in gentle tones, their words softly laced with unfamiliar inflections, but enough universal translation devices existed to communicate. Days turned into weeks, and Lucas was entranced by the beings around him. He was drawn especially to one of the Xe'liarian figures, a quiet and graceful young woman who radiated a beauty so foreign, yet compelling. She moved like the breeze through a forest, her expressions conveying thoughts that words could not, and he found himself trying, and failing, to decipher her enigmatic ways. In time, Lucas discovered that her gaze held a story. She, too, felt a strange fascination toward him, this outsider with short, rounded features and an earthy, solid appearance. In their mutual curiosity, they began to teach each other small things. He showed her how to cook some earth dishes from the simple rations he had, and she, in turn, shared her people's art, their way of singing to plants and coaxing them into vibrant blossoms. Though they were different, a quiet understanding blossomed between them. However, whispers soon spread through the settlement. Some Xe'liarians saw their interactions and frowned upon the growing bond. To them, beauty was sacred, and they questioned if an outsider could ever truly understand the depth of their world's values. The more traditional among them feared that Lucas's presence might disrupt the delicate balance they held with nature and beauty. One evening, as the two of them walked by a glowing river that wove through the settlement, Lucas noticed the air felt tense. A group of Xe'liarians had gathered, murmuring amongst themselves, their eyes narrowed in disapproval. The elder approached him, their expression unreadable. "It is time for you to make a choice," the elder said. "To stay here, to truly be one of us, requires that you let go of the way you see beauty. Beauty is not an attraction, it is a union, a reverence. Would you change yourself to embrace this?" Lucas hesitated. How could he explain that their world was already changing him, shaping his soul in ways he had never thought possible? As he looked to his companion, he knew he would have to answer this challenge. Not for her or even for himself, but to learn if he could truly belong in a place so far from everything he once knew. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of countless alien eyes upon him, and spoke. With the elder's question hanging in the air, Lucas felt a mix of fear and intrigue. The decision wasn't as simple as saying yes or no. For the first time, he realized he'd have to surrender not just his ways, but parts of himself that had once defined him. Days went by as he considered what it would mean to let go of his human concepts of beauty and embrace something he barely understood. Xe'liarians approached him with ancient scrolls, holograms, and symbols they believed captured their ideals. Images of winding rivers, exquisite crystal gardens, and their own elegant forms in ritual dances. Everything about their culture seemed like poetry in motion, each detail more beautiful and deliberate than anything on Earth. But it was also enigmatic and, at times, impenetrable. One evening, the young Xe'liarian woman who had become his companion invited him to a gathering that only a select few were allowed to attend. This was rare for outsiders. Lucas felt honored and nervous as he followed her to a sacred grove on the outskirts of the settlement. The air here was dense with the sweet, intoxicating aroma of the flowering trees. Moonlight poured down through gaps in the branches, casting everything in a silvery glow. The gathering was an ancient ritual, an event that celebrated a unity between all living things. In silence, The Xe'liarians began to sway to the rhythm of a subtle, almost inaudible hum that came from the depths of the grove. They didn't need instruments. Their voices blended into a soft, harmonious melody, like the whisper of a breeze. Their movements were fluid and ethereal, as if they were weaving themselves into the fabric of the world around them. Lucas stood at the edge of the circle, captivated by the sight. He watched his companion move gracefully, her expression serene and transcendent. For the first time, he sensed the beauty they were trying to convey, something beyond physical attraction or aesthetic pleasure. This was beauty that spoke of unity, of blending one's soul with everything around them. He felt the first stirrings of understanding, a hint of what the elder had meant. When the ritual ended, his companion approached him with a faint smile. Her gaze held warmth, but also a question. "Do you understand now?" she asked softly. He paused, searching for the right words. I think so. It's not about looking at something beautiful. It's about becoming part of it." She nodded, her eyes glimmering with approval. "Yes." To the Xe'liarians, beauty is a bond, not a separation. You become the river, the sky, the dance. And in that, you become part of each other. From that night on, Lucas immersed himself in their teachings with renewed dedication. He began to learn their language, not just the spoken words, but the subtle inflections and gestures that conveyed a world of meaning. His own views on beauty began to shift, expanding to encompass things he had never noticed before: the gleam of stardust on the rocks, the strange, fluid architecture of their buildings, the peaceful silence of the forest at dawn. Yet, not all in the settlement were pleased with his progress. Some of the more traditional Xe'liarians still saw him as an outsider, a human who could never fully understand their ways. As his connection with his companion deepened, so did the tension among the people. Whispers circulated, and even the elder began to express concerns about the effects of Lucas's presence. One night, his companion brought him to a secluded part of the forest. "There are those who believe that if you stay, it will disrupt the harmony we hold dear," she confessed, her expression pained. "They fear that your human nature will bring conflict." Lucas felt a pang of guilt, though he struggled to understand how his presence could cause harm. "I didn't mean to disrupt anything. I only wanted to understand." She reached out, taking his hand. "You have come closer to our ways than anyone thought possible. But there are things here, old fears, traditions, that go deep. For you to truly stay, you must do more than understand. You must become one of us, in every way." The words weighed heavily on him. What would it mean to become one of them fully? Could he give up the last parts of himself that remained distinctly human? The days passed in quiet uncertainty. Lucas continued his efforts to integrate, yet the strain of trying to belong to a culture so vastly different from his own began to show. He felt torn between his identity as a human and the yearning to be part of this world. His companion noticed his struggle and one night took him to a nearby cliff that overlooked the valley. There, under the starlit sky, she shared a tale of an ancient Xe'liarian who had once journeyed far beyond their world, only to return changed, no longer fitting into the old ways of life. The elder had allowed this Xe'liarian to stay, but only on the condition that they spend a year in silence, meditating on what it meant to belong. That was their path to unity, she said. They learned to reconcile what they had become with what they had been. Perhaps, you too must find your own way. You may never be fully one of us, but you could become part of our world in a new way. The following day, Lucas went to the elder and asked for permission to undergo his own ritual, one of silent meditation. The elder agreed, instructing him to spend a month in the grove, alone and undisturbed. During this time, Lucas was left with only his thoughts and the presence of the natural world around him. He listened to the hum of the forest, felt the rhythm of life in the settlement, and allowed his mind to quiet. At the end of the month, he emerged, feeling transformed. He no longer felt the need to fully belong, nor did he feel the tension of being an outsider. Instead, he embraced a balance, a new identity that wove his human soul into the fabric of this alien world. The people of the settlement noticed the change in him. They could see it in his eyes, in the way he moved, the way he now seemed to embody the unity they held dear. Even the elder recognized that Lucas had found his own unique path to understanding. In time, the whispers faded. He became part of their rituals, part of their stories, and the bond he shared with his companion deepened into a quiet but enduring connection. He no longer saw her as an otherworldly beauty, but as a reflection of a beauty that was now part of him, part of the world he had chosen to call home. Months passed, and the tension in the settlement ebbed. Lucas had become a fixture in their lives, no longer an outsider, but not entirely one of them either. He found a new sense of peace as he carved out his own place within the Xe'liarian world. His time in the grove had shifted something within him, allowing him to exist without the need for complete assimilation, yet still harmonizing with the life around him. His companion, whom he now shared a deep bond with, grew more comfortable in their connection. They no longer struggled with unspoken questions of whether they could truly understand each other. Instead, they lived in the shared moments of quiet walks, the glow of the evening sky, and the subtle joy of simply being together. Lucas learned more of their language, not just in words, but in gestures, in songs, in the silences that carried meaning. And in turn, his companion began to adopt some of his human customs, even laughing as she tried earth meals or listened to his stories of home. But the peace was not destined to last forever. One evening, as the twin moons of Xe'liar rose high in the sky, a visitor arrived from beyond the stars. A small human spacecraft, one of the many that patrolled the outer regions of explored space, had picked up the signal of the settlement. They had come, not to rescue Lucas, but to check on the status of the region as part of an ongoing effort to ensure the safety of humans stationed on distant worlds. When they landed, Lucas found himself facing his first human visitors in many months, and the sight stirred emotions he hadn't realized he had buried. A team of officers disembarked, dressed in the sleek uniforms of the United Earth Confederation. The commanding officer, a tall woman with sharp features and an air of authority, approached Lucas with a mixture of surprise and curiosity. "Lucas Bradford," she asked, consulting a digital tablet. "We've been looking for you. You've been reported missing for over a year." Lucas nodded, the words feeling strange in his mouth. "I know. I wasn't exactly lost." The officer studied him for a moment, her eyes flicking over his now subtly changed appearance. The way he carried himself, the Xe'liarian clothes he wore, the small alien patterns woven into his skin from a ritual bonding ceremony months earlier. She glanced at the settlement behind him, the graceful figures watching them from a distance. "So, do you want to come back with us? We could use someone with your experience. This settlement is remarkable, and it would make for quite a report." Lucas hesitated, feeling the weight of the question. A year ago, he might have jumped at the chance to leave, to return to Earth and its familiar ways. But now, Earth felt like a distant dream, and the world he once called home seemed smaller, dimmer in his mind. "I'm not sure if I belong there anymore," Lucas said slowly, meeting the officer's eyes. "This place has changed me. I don't know if I'd fit in back home." The officer raised an eyebrow, clearly not expecting such an answer. "You've integrated into their society, then?" "As much as I can," Lucas replied. "But it's more than that. They don't see beauty the way we do. They live it, they become it. I've learned things here that I didn't even know existed. Going back would feel like leaving part of myself behind." The officer frowned, clearly unused to this kind of response. "You're saying you'd rather stay with them?" Lucas glanced over at his companion, who stood a few paces behind him, watching quietly. Her eyes met his, and in that moment, he understood. He wasn't just choosing to stay for her, or for the world itself. He was staying because he had found something in this place that he could never explain to someone who hadn't experienced it. He had become part of something larger than himself, a connection that transcended language, culture, or species. "Yes," he said softly. "I want to stay." The officer's expression tightened, but she didn't argue. She tapped her tablet again, making a note. "I'll have to file a report about this, you understand. Your family back home. They deserve to know you're alive." "I understand," Lucas replied. "Tell them I'm happy here." With a final nod, the officer signaled her team to prepare for departure. Lucas stood back, watching as the spacecraft lifted off, leaving a trail of light in the twilight sky. He felt a strange sense of closure as the ship vanished beyond the horizon, taking with it the last lingering ties to his old life. His companion approached him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the moons. She reached out, taking his hand in hers. "You chose to stay." Lucas smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. "I did." She tilted her head, her luminous eyes gazing at him with a quiet understanding. "You are one of us now, even if you are still human." He nodded, knowing that this was true. He would never fully be a Xe'liarian, but he had found a way to weave his human identity into their world, to exist as both an outsider and a part of something greater. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Lucas settled into a life that felt whole. He worked alongside the Xe'liarians, learning their ways, sharing what he could from his own. He and his companion grew closer, their bond deepening into something that transcended words or species. They were two beings from different worlds, yet they had found a way to share a life, a future. In time, the whispers about Lucas ceased. The settlement accepted him as part of their world, and the tensions that had once plagued his presence faded into memory. He had become a bridge between two worlds, not by changing who he was, but by finding harmony between them. One evening, as Lucas and his companion stood on the cliff overlooking the valley, watching the stars swirl overhead, he realized that he no longer felt the pull of Earth. The stars, once so distant and strange, now felt like home. "I think I finally understand," he said softly, his voice carried by the gentle breeze. "Beauty isn't something you look at. It's something you live. Something you become." His companion smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder as they watched the universe unfold around them. In that moment, Lucas knew that he had found his place, not as a human lost on an alien world, but as someone who had discovered a new way to see, to live, to belong. And in that realization, he was finally at peace.